The desert stretched out as far as Tyan could see. The land seemed to go on forever, a vast barren wasteland where nothing moved except for the occasional gust of wind that sent clouds of dust spiraling through the air. It was a strange world, a harsh world. Kenori, the planet they had ended up on, had promised much when they first set foot here, but now it had only proven to be a cruel, unforgiving place. Tyan, a young Apache girl, squinted into the hot sun. Her dark eyes were focused on the horizon, scanning the endless sea of sand for any sign of life. She was thin, but her body was strong, built from years of surviving in harsh conditions. It was all that kept her going now, along with the thought of her mother. But that hope was beginning to fade. Her mother, Nayeli, was sick, really sick. Tyan could see the weakness in her mother's face, the pale skin, the cough that wouldn't stop, the way she struggled to even sit up. Her heart ached for her mother. Nayeli had always been the strong one, the protector, the guide. But now she was just a frail shell of the woman she had been. The medical supplies they had salvaged from their shipwreck were barely enough to ease her suffering, let alone cure her. There were no doctors on this planet. There was no help, no shelter. Tyan had tried everything. She had used the knowledge her Apache ancestors had passed down to her, how to read the land, how to find water, how to build shelter. But it wasn't enough. They had crashed days ago. The transport ship had failed, and they had been left stranded. Now they were running out of time. Nayeli lay back against a rock, her breathing shallow. Tyan crouched beside her mother, brushing the hair from her face. "We need to keep moving," Tyan whispered, though she knew the words sounded hollow. There was no energy left in her mother to move, no strength left in her body. But Tyan could not bring herself to give up. She had to try. "We have nowhere to go," Nayeli murmured, her voice faint. "You can't do this alone, Tyan." Tyan clenched her jaw. She had heard her mother's words before, and they always cut deeper than any blade could. But this time, she couldn't afford to let them defeat her. Not now. Not when there was still a chance. "I will find a way," she said, more to herself than to her mother. "I'll find a way." The heat of the desert was unbearable, but Tyan refused to stop. She packed what little they had left into their small bag, trying to remain focused. She could feel the weight of the responsibility growing heavier by the minute, but she couldn't afford to think about it. She helped Nayeli to her feet, though the effort seemed to drain what little energy the older woman had left. Together they walked slowly, their footsteps leaving faint imprints in the soft sand. Tyan's eyes kept darting around, looking for anything that could offer shelter, but there was nothing, just endless stretches of dry land. Tyan was starting to feel the weight of their isolation. The thought of the unknown was terrifying. She had read about planets like this, planets that seemed uninhabited but were full of dangers hiding in plain sight. Alien species, wild animals, or worse, even bandits who might try to take what little they had left. Tyan had heard stories about such places. This was no longer just a barren wasteland, it was a deadly one. Suddenly there was a loud crack in the sky. Tyan stopped and looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. Dark clouds were beginning to form on the horizon, and the wind was picking up. A sandstorm was coming. "Mother, we need to find shelter now," Tyan shouted. Nayeli nodded weakly, but her legs buckled beneath her, and Tyan had to catch her. She didn't know how much longer her mother could last. She looked around frantically, searching for a place to hide. Then she saw it, a narrow cave hidden behind a large rock formation. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. With all the strength she could muster, Tyan helped her mother toward the cave. The storm was coming fast now, the wind howling in the distance. They made it to the cave just in time. The sandstorm hit, the roar of the wind filling the air as the sand whipped against the rocks. Tyan pushed her mother inside, finding a small spot to rest against the cave wall. The storm was loud. The world outside was nothing but chaos, but inside it was quiet, eerily so. Tyan sat down next to her mother, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to do next. She couldn't keep running forever, and she didn't know how much longer her mother would hold on. She needed help. The thought hit her like a bolt of lightning. But who could help? There was no one out here. They were alone in the middle of a desert on an unknown planet. She clenched her fists, trying to push the thoughts away. She couldn't give up. She couldn't let her mother die out here, but then a sound. A low rumbling hum that seemed to come from far off in the distance. Tyan froze. The storm was so loud she had almost missed it, but now that she was listening, the sound was unmistakable. It was the hum of something mechanical. A vehicle? A ship? She stood up, grabbing her mother's hand. "We're not alone," she whispered, her heart racing. "Someone's out there." The storm raged on, but Tyann didn't wait. She stepped out of the cave, squinting against the sand and wind. The sound was getting closer now. She could see a dark shape moving against the orange sky. Something large, something powerful. It was a man on horseback, or at least that's what it looked like. But this was no ordinary horse. The creature was mechanical, built of metal and wires. And the rider was a man, a cowboy of sorts. The man rode through the storm with ease, his face hidden behind a scarf. He was looking directly at Tyann now, and his eyes seemed to lock onto hers. She felt a rush of hope, but also a rush of fear. What kind of man would be out here in this storm on a planet like this? He stopped just a few feet away, his mechanical steed snorting as it stood still. The man slid off the creature, his boots hitting the sand with a soft thud. He didn't say anything at first, just studied her for a moment. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. Tyann nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. "My mother. She's sick. We need help." The cowboy's eyes softened as he looked at Naeli. "You're lucky I found you," he said quietly. "I'll take you somewhere safe. But we have to move fast before this storm gets worse." Tyann didn't hesitate. She helped her mother to her feet again, and with the cowboy's assistance they climbed onto his mechanical steed, feeling the warmth of the machine beneath them as they began to move. The storm continued to howl around them, but the man seemed to know where he was going, cutting through the desert like it was second nature. As they rode toward what Tyann hoped would be safety, she couldn't help but wonder who this man was and why he was out here. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The storm continued to rage behind them, its howling winds almost deafening, but the mechanical beast the cowboy rode was steady. It moved through the desert like a creature born of the harsh land itself, its legs powerful and unyielding, cutting through the sand without hesitation. The cowboy guided the steed with ease, leading Tyann and her sick mother through the storm. Tyann held her mother close, gripping the stranger's jacket as they rode. The mechanical horse's movements were smooth but firm, offering them a steady ride in the middle of nature's chaos. Naeli, weak and feverish, leaned against her daughter, her breath shallow and unsteady. Tyann looked down at her mother, her heart filled with worry, but she didn't let the fear show. She had to be strong. She had to hold on to hope for both their sakes. The man leading them didn't speak much. He was focused, his eyes scanning the horizon ahead. His scarf covered most of his face, leaving only his sharp eyes visible. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a place like this. His clothes were dusty and worn, but his gear, his steed, the equipment on his belt, was advanced, suggesting a level of skill and knowledge beyond the desert's bare necessities. After what felt like an eternity, the man slowed the mechanical beast to a stop. Tyann's eyes widened as she saw a small structure ahead, tucked between the hills, hidden from the storm. It wasn't much, just a simple building built into the rock with windows covered by metal shutters. But it was a shelter. It was safe. "Welcome to my home," the cowboy said, his voice still low but carrying a sense of calm authority. He dismounted with ease and helped Tyann and her mother off the steed. "Inside quickly. You're both in no condition to be out here much longer." Tyann didn't ask questions. She was too exhausted to care. She simply helped her mother toward the door, stepping inside. The warmth of the place hit her like a wave. It wasn't much warmer than the desert outside, but it was shelter, and that was what they needed. The inside of the structure was much more advanced than Tyann had expected. The walls were made of thick rock, but there were machines everywhere, shelves lined with tools, gadgets, and equipment, some of which Tyann couldn't even begin to understand. It was clear that this man had a great deal of knowledge about survival, about technology, and about the harsh desert they were in. "Sit her down here," the cowboy said, gesturing to a small bed in the corner of the room. "I'll get something to help her." Tyann hesitated, but then nodded, helping her mother onto the bed. Naeli's eyes fluttered, and her breathing became even more labored. Tyann's heart twisted with each passing second. She had to do something. They couldn't lose her. The cowboy moved swiftly, grabbing a small box from one of the shelves and opening it to reveal medical supplies. He worked quickly, examining Naeli with practiced hands, his face tense but calm. Tyann could only watch helpless as the man did what he could to stabilize her mother's condition. After a few long minutes, the cowboy stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth. "She's not out of danger yet, but I've slowed the illness. She should be able to rest for a while." Tyann sighed in relief, but the worry didn't go away. Her mother still looked pale, her body frail. There was so much more to be done, and Tyann wasn't sure if they had the time. The cowboy gave her a small nod. "She'll need more rest and fluids. I've got some supplies, but it's going to take time." Tyann nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The cowboy didn't respond right away. He just stood there watching her, as if deciding whether to speak or not. Finally he spoke. "I don't usually help people like this," he said, his voice rough but surprisingly gentle. "I'm not in the business of making friends. I've been alone out here for a long time." Tyann raised her eyebrows, surprised by his words. "Why did you help us then?" He hesitated for a moment, looking down at his boots as if weighing his thoughts. Then he met her gaze, his eyes sharp yet tired. "Because I know what it's like to be alone, to have nowhere to go, to be caught in a storm with no one to help." Tyann looked at him carefully, sensing that there was more to his story than he was letting on. "You're not really from here, are you?" The cowboy paused again, then slowly shook his head. "No, I wasn't born here. But I came here, for reasons I don't like to talk about." Tyann studied him. There was something about his eyes that told her he carried a great burden. He wasn't just a cowboy. He was a man running from something, or perhaps running towards something. She could see the scars of his past, even if he wasn't ready to share them. "I've seen a lot of people come and go," the cowboy continued. "Most of them don't make it. They think they can survive the desert, but the desert doesn't care. It'll swallow you whole if you're not prepared." Tyann nodded, understanding. She had learned that lesson the hard way. The desert was a brutal teacher. It didn't offer mercy to the weak. "I've been in your shoes," he added, almost as if speaking to himself. "Lost, hopeless, but you keep moving. You keep surviving." Tyann was quiet for a moment, considering his words. She had never given up on survival, not once. But she had never been this close to losing everything before. Her mother's illness had drained her hope, and now she was relying on a stranger for help. A stranger with his own scars. "Why are you alone?" Tyann asked, her voice barely audible. The cowboy's gaze shifted, and for the first time Tyann saw the weariness in his eyes. "Because I lost everyone. I had a team, a family, but it all fell apart. The galaxy isn't kind to people who make mistakes. It took everything from me." The sadness in his voice was impossible to ignore. Tyann didn't press him further. She could see the pain in his eyes, and she knew that it wasn't something he was ready to share. But his honesty stirred something in her, a connection she hadn't expected. They were both survivors. They had both lost. Tyann moved closer to her mother, taking her hand in hers. "We're all we have left," she said quietly. "And we'll survive. Together." The cowboy looked at her, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He nodded, his face softening. "Together," he agreed, his voice carrying the weight of shared experience. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to die down, leaving behind an eerie silence. The world was still, save for the occasional whistling of the wind. Tyann stayed beside her mother, watching her carefully as she slept. The cowboy, now sitting near the fire, kept a quiet vigil of his own. Eventually, as the night grew darker, Tyann turned to him. "What's your name?" she asked. The cowboy paused, then spoke, his voice steady. "Jace, just Jace," Tyann nodded. "Thank you, Jace, for everything." Jace's gaze softened, and for the first time since they met, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "No one should be out here alone," he said simply. Tyann didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if her mother would get better, or if they would even make it off this planet. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that they had a chance. Together, they would survive.